Are you ready for rapid fire?
I think this is the perfect segue to some really good rapid fire here.
I think you're right about that. So we had Isaiah Foskey declare for the NFL draft today. How will you remember Foskey's time at Notre Dame?
I always remember Foskey as what he's going down in the record book for, and what his the most influential stat there is as a defensive end is the havoc and sacks that he created. On the back end, and just a lot of what Ryan was hinting at. It's just the freak athleticism, right? Like this, it reminds you of a guy like Myles Garrett, where you just look at him, it's like this guy could play probably a multitude of different positions, yet what can we use his 6'6" frame and long wingspan? Where can he be the most dynamic and effective at? So for me, I just the dynamic athleticism and the sacks is what I almost remember him by. And like Ryan kind of hinted at too, I'm really excited for him going forward, because I think if he can get into a good NFL system, his game is only going to get more refined, right? Like we've only, I think, seen him kind of tap the surface of his potential. So I'm really looking forward to wherever he lands, and I hope it's a great fit for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. I mean, this guy really, he basically all but set the Notre Dame career sack record in 2 seasons, 11 sacks this year, 11 sacks last year, and then just 4.5 sacks the year before that. So, again, the bulk of this record came in the last 2 years, what he was able to do. And then you add the 4.5 on top of that. And it was kind of a career that early on, kind of like I think untapped is probably the best way to put it, because there was all this potential early on. And it kind of took a little bit longer, I think, than we thought for it to really emerge. But then we saw it, and like even this year, it's like he ended up with 11 sacks, but I still don't think we saw peak Isaiah Foskey this year. So I'll remember him as just a phenomenal athlete who made impact in a very short amount of time. And I think you're right. I think this is a guy who's going to go on and make a lot more impact. I think the sky is still the limit for this guy in the NFL. It's a matter of refining some things. And as Ryan was saying at the start of the show, once he gets to the combine, I think he's going to open up a lot of eyes there with the way he tests at the combine here.
There's a lot of eye candy for someone like Isaiah Foskey, and that goes a long way with NFL guys. And believe it or not, NFL guys will like the opportunity or the chance that Isaiah Foskey presents, because they know, the hard things that you can't teach: speed, athleticism, height, power. He's got all of those things. The hardest thing, the easiest thing or the thing that he's missing the most is the easiest thing to teach. The refining, his craft, his art. And he's going to learn that also from guys that, are on his team. Teammates will teach him different moves. You hear it all the time, like guys like Micah Parsons, when he came into the league, there are guys that show you, different things and maybe other, techniques that you haven't considered before. So I just think that ultimately we're going to see the best Isaiah Foskey once he reaches the NFL.
I think so too. Now, this question someone threw up in the chat yesterday, and we didn't get a chance to get to it, but I thought it was the perfect rapid fire type question. Who will end up with more career combined touchdowns at Notre Dame in his career? Drew Pyne or Tyler Buchner?
This is actually a very tough question, because Buckner's not going to do it all in this bowl game, so that's off the table. And if they bring in a transfer portal quarterback that ultimately becomes the guy next year, we might there's chance we might this could be Buckner's last game as a starting quarterback this bowl game. And for me, I just feel like that it's going to end up being Drew Pyne. I think a lot of, what Malik said was true. This coaching staff realizes that if they want to take the next step and win a national championship, because that's the ultimate goal, they need a Caleb Williams type quarterback. They need a Drake May type quarterback. They need a CJ Stroud type quarterback. And I'm not completely, I'm not saying that Buchner isn't that guy, but Buchner hasn't shown that he's that guy yet. And unfortunately for him, he got hurt, and you can't control those things either. So I think if they're serious about finding a portal quarterback and bringing him in, that's going to be the starter next year. So I'm going to actually say that Pyne is going to end up with more career touchdowns at Notre Dame.
I think so too, because he's sitting on 20. He leaves with 26, I guess I should say. 26 career touchdown passes is what he ended up with. 22 passing this year, 2 more rushing, and then 2 passing last year. while Buchner has 8 total. And the fact that we know they're going out to bring in a transfer portal quarterback, I think says a lot. And just what you said, there's so much because of the lack of experience that Tyler Buchner came in with. We can see the raw tools as an athlete, but just the fact that they're in a position now where even if Drew Pyne had stayed and they had Buchner, and then of course you've got Mincy coming up next year, and you've got Carr the year after that. Buchner just kind of seems to be in that in-between spot where it could get really hard for him, to push much past that anymore, unless he develops at a really rapid rate, either this offseason or, the combination of this offseason and next season. And that's, all assuming that he's still here a couple of years from now as well. So, Pyne leaves with the lead, and I tend to agree. I think that it will be him. And I realize, some other people think differently. I would have thought differently. But again, the injury, I guess, kind of leaves you with enough doubt for them to be in the system that they're in right now. Like Malik was saying earlier, this is a really developmental kind of Gator Bowl, for Tyler Buchner, a chance to really show what he can do and really up his game, knowing that a new guy is coming in this spring.
Yeah, and I see some some of these comments in the chat. I don't think that Notre Dame is just necessarily going to hand the reins over to whoever transfers in, but I mean, don't get it confused. The reason why you bring in a guy from the transfer portal is the expectation that he's potentially going to start. And Tyler Buchner has only made 2 career starts himself, and you bring in a transfer portal quarterback who's ultimately going to have more game experience, and amongst other things. So I don't think that they're necessarily just going to hand the reins over. It's going to be a competition, but ultimately, it's just hard to judge because we just haven't seen enough of Tyler Buchner yet to make the decision that no matter who comes in, he's going to be better than them. Because I can't make that statement because I just haven't seen Tyler Buchner play enough yet.
Yeah. By the way, I see the stuff going on in the chat. We're not talking about things that happened in a political realm, with world leaders today. I'll just leave it at that. Joe Alt is beginning All-American recognition this week. What do you think about that?
I think that Joe Alt, amongst a very good offensive line, I think it's he's a deserving candidate. He's been one of their best offensive linemen all year. It is something that is highlighted, by different, broadcast groups, whether that's Jason Garrett, some of these guys, the few games that we've seen on other, with Dan Orlovsky, Kirk Herbstreit, Chris Fowler. These guys have all talked about, how good Notre Dame's offensive line is. So it's hard to boil it down to who the best player is, but I think that he's definitely deserving of some of this All-American recognition. How about you?
I absolutely think so as well. And to me, it's like it kind of flies under the radar a little bit. Like Pro Football Focus is one of the organizations that named him an All-American. And you look at the PFF grades that he ended up with, he had the best grade of any tackle in the FBS this season. He had the top run blocking mark in the FBS as well, and his 85.6 pass block grade ranked 8th in the nation. And I mean, 0 sacks allowed, 5 pressures this season. And again, maybe it's because of where the offensive line started out. I mean, we know how good this guy is, but we don't we grade the skill position guys, we grade the quarterbacks, we pick them apart. We grade, the linebackers, all these different positions, the wide receivers, the running backs, all of them. We have stats to back it all up. Unless you're sitting there analyzing and crunching and doing all that different kind of stuff, then it's hard to really know just how these guys stack up around the nation. And the fact that he ended up with 2 of the best grades of any tackle in the nation as a sophomore, and this guy is just a couple of years removed from being a tight end in high school as well. Again, we knew he was good, but I think to an extent he kind of flew beneath the radar a little bit just to exactly how good he was. Because, again, you don't get I don't remember like individual offensive linemen getting, like offensive player of the week and stuff like that. Like against Clemson, they gave Drew Pyne the offensive player of the game and that kind of thing. So, I think it's great to see Joe Alt get this kind of recognition. And again, it shows kind of where this offensive line has come. He's a real example of it, where it's come from in a pretty short amount of time the last couple of years.
Definitely agree.
Fill in the blank. It'll be blank if Georgia doesn't win at all this year.
It'll be not surprising, honestly, if Georgia doesn't win it all this year, in my opinion. It is hard to win back-to-back national championships. I mean, I know Alabama kind of makes it look easy here and there, but even they struggled, with really good teams to win back-to-back years. So, and I also think that there's a lot of talent left in these Final Four teams, and anything is realistically kind of possible. I think that Ohio State definitely has a shot, more than a shot. I think that game is actually going to be relatively close. And it's just going to come down to is, can Ohio State play enough defense to slow Georgia down? And is Georgia's defense really good enough to shut down the explosive, Ohio State offense? So I think that there's a very high chance that Ohio State wins that game. And then between Michigan and TCU, I would assume that Michigan would, go on, because I think that they're the better team. But I just think that Michigan and Georgia also provides, again, another matchup for Georgia that gives Michigan, as much as I regret to say, a realistic option, chance to win it all. Michigan has a very physical front, offensively and defensively, both things that Georgia has. Michigan has a very good running game. And in that game, it would come down to, I think, who could, air the ball out a little bit better on offense between Michigan and Georgia. So, I know that Georgia looks really good on paper, and they've done so all season, but they've had their up and down too with some teams, right? Like, they didn't just blow everyone out.
Blips.
There's a couple blips, and I think once you get into these bigger games when it comes to the playoffs, that there is still a chance that these blips can happen. I think that the gap between Georgia and the remaining three teams is a lot closer than what people want to admit at the end of the day. It is still college football. Anything can happen on any given day, right? So it's like, to me, that gap isn't as big as what some others might think.
I would still be shocked. I would be completely shocked if they don't win at all. They've won 14 straight, 27 of their last 28 games, really only challenged twice this year. Like we said, a couple of blips. Missouri nearly did it. Kentucky pushed them as well. But for the most part, like, to win 14 straight, and I think it's 27 of their last 28 games that they've won at this point. Yeah. And I just, like week 0 predictions, Georgia will destroy Michigan again like last year. Georgia only had the blips because they sleepwalked through the first halves. And that's, I just, is Michigan a mirage? I keep wanting, I thought they were a mirage going into Ohio State. Obviously, they end up winning that fairly lopsided again. But, like, whether it's Michigan, Michigan State, even Notre Dame to some extent, like, these teams that tend to play more power football, from up here, not named Ohio State, they haven't fared well when it comes to the playoffs. They can bully some of these teams in this, neck of the woods around, but it's a lot different when you mix speed and explosiveness and size and the whole thing like Georgia has, especially up front. So I would be completely shocked if Georgia doesn't end up winning it all.
I'm glad we are not. Marshall is the only person in this chat right now that also has some of my backing. Georgia gave up 400 yards in the air against LSU, and Ohio State's air attack is better. So I know it's not, apples to apples, but you still have to take a look at it. I just think that this game is going to be a lot closer than what people are giving Ohio State credit for. And I would love to revisit this conversation again at some point.
Oh, we will. We will. I mean, it's setting itself up for that. We're going to have to revisit it at some point. We've got a couple of super chats. Wicked Bronco Productions, TB8. To be honest, I don't know why kids fall in love with the flashiness. We saw A&M fall apart after abusing the pay-for-player style. Love Estime, Diggs better than Edwards. And this is in reference to the Edwards decommitment. I mean, I don't know if he's going to Colorado, which it seems to be. One, Colorado is obviously a lot closer to Kansas, where Edwards is from, than Notre Dame, so like that's there. And if they're throwing NIL, and I mean, it's easy for young kids to fall in love with that Dion Flash. I mean, that's part of why Colorado hired him, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that has to be, upon kind of what Ryan was talking about earlier, that has to be in the back of Edwards' mind. You have guys like Diggs, you have guys like Estimate, you have Love, who's already committed. That's a running back room, and amongst other wide receiver commits, that's pretty full. And you don't blame a guy who wants to come in and be that guy immediately. And Deion Sanders has made it very apparent that they are going to bring in guys quickly, and they are going to get rid of guys quickly who don't fit the mold for what Colorado is going to be doing going forward. And so when you hear a coach say that they're kind of refreshing their players and the program, and you're one of the best talents, out there in terms of your speed and athleticism, that only means that you're going to get your opportunity to be that guy kind of faster at Colorado, in my opinion.
And so another super chat. Also, I'd rather get a guy like Card and have him and Buchner battle it out. I don't understand why our fans crap on a kid who hasn't had a fair shot. So, again, I don't, I don't know. Do you have anything to say to that?
No, that is ultimately what it's going to be. Like, no one's just going to be handed the starting
I
quarterback
think it's going to be a
position.
competition. Yeah.
It is 100% a competition. I've said this before. Fall camp opens up. Every position is up for competition. No one has their spots. You don't know what the incoming guys are going to be doing. You don't know, I'm talking incoming as in like fresh new guys. You don't know about the guys who are maybe on, depth chart 2 or 3 from the season before. Like, that's why you have the offseason to get better. Guys have a different commitment in the offseason, right? Like, you have guys who work very hard. I'll be very honest. My freshman year in college, I was buried in the depth chart. I was, 5 or 6, spots down there. I had a tremendous offseason. I worked very hard, and I worked my way up to, a 2, almost competing for the 1 spot. I won't even say almost. I was competing, for the 1 spot here and there. So things happen. Guys have a different commitment level in the offseason. Guys get in better shape. Guys get, whatever it might be. And all those positions are going to be a competition. It's never this guy is just handed the spot. Even we had guys who were All-Americans, and their spots were never guaranteed.
That's what Marcus Freeman has talked about since day one. Healthy competitions, having competitions at every spot. It only makes you better if you've got that competition. That's absolutely right. All right, just the Detroit Lions are 5-7, just a game better than the Indianapolis Colts, who have a 4-8 record. Of course, they're in different divisions, so I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just looking at when you look at those records and what the teams look like right now, how different do those two situations feel?
To me, those situations are very different because I think the Lions could potentially end up the rest of this season 5 games and potentially go on a stretch to kind of make the playoffs. They've shown the potential. They're hot right now, right? Like, they beat the Commanders. They've beaten the Bears. I know the Bears aren't a great team. They beat the Giants, who are right now in a playoff spot. They beat the Packers. I know the Packers aren't great, but these are still division rivals for them, right? Like, teams that they don't necessarily beat. And then, to me, more importantly, you look at some of their losses, right? Like, they've lost to the Eagles by 3 points. They lost to the Vikings by 4 points. They lost to the Seahawks by 3 points. They lost to the Dolphins by 4 points. They lost to the Bills by 3 points. Like, these are all losses against very quality teams by a very slim margin, right? And so, like, to me, I thought the Lions were going to make the step of finally breaking the over 500 trend this year. I thought that they weren't necessarily going to be a playoff team, but I thought they were going to be a very solid team. And next year, then, maybe the year after that would kind of be their window to get back into the playoffs again. But to me, for the Colts, you're going through a midseason change at coach. You have all of this talent. You have this defense that was supposed to be, tremendous. You have Shaquille Leonard, who was supposed to be the best linebacker in football. He's been hurt. Their offensive line has been banged up and not quite as good as what it should be. They don't really have a number 1 wide receiver who can take over. They bring in a veteran quarterback. So to me, it felt like the Colts kind of regress in a sense, and that the Lions are making a push or a charge here towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, there's been all these expectations, obviously, on the Colts, and they made the decision finally to cut ties with Frank Reich. I mean, the Jeff Saturday thing, they have actually looked better than what I thought they were going to look like under Jeff Saturday. Even when that fourth quarter completely snowballed against him against the Cowboys, on Sunday with 33 straight points by Dallas. I mean, that was a 2-point game in the fourth quarter. And, I know you and I were both pretty nervous about that. But at the same time, whether they've had injuries, Darius Leonard out and all this different stuff, like I can name a couple of different Detroit Lions. I can name more Indianapolis Colts than Detroit Lions. And I think Dan Campbell, like the job he has done with that roster, they have Aiden Hutchinson, they have Jared Goff. And obviously they got Goff back in exchange for Matt Stafford last year. That roster is not a good roster. And for them to be sitting as close to 500 as they are and a couple of bounces away from being over 500 right now, I actually think he has done a really good job. And I would, I have no skin in this. Like, I hope that Lions management and ownership doesn't decide to cut bait with Dan Campbell. They need to get him more talent on that team, put something on that team, and especially in the division that they're in right now, I think they can compete. The Colts have just been complete underachievers regardless of who has been there. So to me, like the Lions 5-7 feels infinitely better than the Colts 4-8, considering all the really realistic expectations that the Colts had them, considering that is a bad division as well. And they're sitting there at 4-8, with a loss to Jacksonville and teams that they have fallen to, So I think it's completely different. I think that Dan Campbell has done a lot better with a much worse roster.
By far.
Fill in the blank. After being signed by the LA Rams this week, it's blank that Baker Mayfield is now with his third team in less than a year.
It's comical to me that Baker Mayfield is on his third team this season. And I kind of, I feel bad for the guy in some regards because he had a really good season when the Browns went to the playoffs. I was looking at some stats earlier. Like he was up there. Like he had, I think, like 28 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He was up there in 20 plus yard completions. He was up there for contested completion percentage. Like he had a pretty solid year, but unfortunately got hurt and then tried to play through injuries and then kind of lost trust within the fan base and what the coaches wanted to do. And then, of course, Cleveland brings in Deshaun Watson. And then he gets bounced to Carolina where, Rule is kind of testing out all these different quarterbacks. And now he's gone. And now, you see the Rams, whether they did it to block the 49ers or whether they're actually genuinely trying to win games because they have their own quarterback issues right now. I just think it's kind of comical. There's a lot going on for Baker Mayfield. But at the end of the day, I don't see him sticking in the NFL ultimately. And I think that this kind of might be his last destination. And unless he does something very dramatic here with the Rams, I think that we are seeing the Baker Mayfield window drastically closing.
I mean, it is crazy that just a couple of years ago, as bad as the Cleveland Browns were before he got there, and then they turn into a playoff team in fairly short order, and he's the quarterback for the playoff Cleveland Browns. He's sitting here. He's traded to Carolina, and now he's waived by Carolina. He's signed by the Rams, and like the fact that the 49ers apparently didn't want anything to do with him, even after going after Garoppolo. It's just nuts, like, to think that, all this, like the Browns who couldn't win, who hadn't been to the playoffs and, all this stuff, and they were an eyelash away from beating the Chiefs in the playoffs for that matter. And now here he is just a couple of years later, and he's lucky to have a job. And you're right. It seems like it's probably the beginning of the end. To me, it's just crazy where he is right now. A few more super chats to work in from Jason Luck for offensive coordinator. Okay. JK, I want Tyler Buchner to be the starter at Notre Dame next year. I understand the competition and the competitiveness, but that kid has earned it, and I think he would have done great if he stays healthy. Ultimately, I think he would have done really well. I don't know. I mean, like I've said before, the biggest downside, I think, to this season, especially when you had a first-year head coach and the whole thing, is you completely lost a year of development for Tyler Buchner. Like, this should have been a big developmental, like 8-4 with Tyler Buchner, if that's what they would have ended up with. And then you've got all this experience for Tyler Buchner heading toward next season. Maybe the decision is even different about bringing in, someone in the transfer portal or the grad transfer portal this offseason. But that's not what you have. All the experience went to Drew Pyne instead because Buchner was injured. I really would have liked to have seen what he could have done this year. And I think as a program, they would have been in much better shape if it would have been him, especially when you look at the fact that Drew Pyne has decided to jump without, one, hanging out for the bowl game, or two, trying to go through spring practice and compete for a job.
Yeah, ultimately, as unfortunate as it is, Notre Dame is in the exact same position that they were essentially a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Like they have a quarterback that's no longer going to be a quarterback. They think that, Buchner is going to be that guy. And now that's the really crappy part about what the Buchner injury, aside from, anyone getting hurt and obviously the things that he's been battling to get back. But a lot of what you said, it takes away from the development of him. It takes away from the development as, a team with their quarterback. And a thing that, I wanted to talk about too with what JK just said, I think I understand that he has earned the position, but he earned it for this season. And unfortunately, next season is a completely new slate. There's going to be completely new quarterbacks. And that's why I can't personally say that just because he earned it this year, that should roll over into next season. It's a brand new season. There's, new factors, all kinds of things.
Yeah. So the super chat, let's say the dust is settled with recruiting. We get one of our top 3 portal quarterbacks and no staff changes. Thoughts on the floor for this team next year?
Yeah,
Excuse me. Go ahead.
So the way I look at this is if they get it doesn't even matter if it's a transfer quarterback, if it's a Tyler Buchner still at quarterback, if they can have elevated play at quarterback along with this offensive line and the running game that we've seen on top of a top 20 defense, a team that finished top 20 in overall defensive stats with a very young secondary and potentially, upgrading at the linebacker position. I think if we see elevated play at quarterback, this is a very easily 11-1, potentially 12-0 type of team. I definitely think that you will see more than 8 wins. And I think it's double-digit wins, whether that's 10, 11, 12, and then obviously going into the playoffs as well. But I think you add at least 2 wins, considering the Marcus Freeman's second year and a quarterback with elevated play.
Completely think the same thing. I think the floor is 10-2, especially if you do have a quarterback that's got experience. Like look at what Jack Cohn did last year. He had experience and they go 11-1. Now the schedule next year won't be a cakewalk, but I still think that they can finish 10-2 against it. You're going to have Ohio State and USC. I can't remember I think those are like in back-to-back games potentially, Ohio State and USC next year. So it's not going to be easy, but at the same time, I can very easily see them. You get the right guy at quarterback and everything that you said about the defense, you're going to have more better. I think that, and Vince and I talked about this yesterday, as great as Michael Mayer is and as much of a loss as it's going to be, maybe that balances out the offense, just in terms of you're not going to have a quarterback who locks in on one guy like Michael Mayer all the time. It potentially opens a lot of other things up. And again, with an experienced guy going into that position, I think that's going to do a lot for them next year.
Definitely.
All right, well, we will go ahead and wrap it up with that tonight. Again, it has been a very busy night, all kinds of comings and goings here this evening. We started off with the decommitment of Dylan Edwards and heard about that from Ryan Roberts, and then the NFL draft decision by Isaiah Foskey. Also want to mention that I posted the interview with Andrew Marchand, the sports media columnist from the New York Post, who also is the co-host of the Marchand and Oran Sports Media podcast. We talked a lot about the Notre Dame NBC contract, where Notre Dame potentially stands going forward, if there are going to be other bidders for the services of Notre Dame, to broadcast Notre Dame's games going forward. We talked about the current booth of Jack Collinsworth and Jason Garrett. We also talked about Brady Quinn, since people always love to bring up Brady Quinn, understandably. We talked about the Frolics and some other stuff as well. So you can find that on our Irish Breakdown podcast channel, whether it's Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also find it, of course, on the YouTube channel as well. And Tommy Guns, I believe I might have seen your tweet briefly, Tommy. I will watch that trailer later on tonight after the show is over, because it has been a busy day, so I haven't had a chance to actually view much today. So I will check that out as soon as I can. But
I
thank
just
you
wanted
for
to
passing that on.
get to there was one last kind of super chat in the chat by Patrick Barnes. Thank you for the contribution. He asked about the opinion on Dylan Edwards
There it
decommit.
is.
I just wanted to say that we got into that at the beginning of the show, and it looks like that was kind of mentioned in the chat. And I think that's where you'll hear a lot of great stuff, because we did have Ryan Roberts on, and he is the main recruiting guy for Irish Breakdown. But just kind of to sum it up, Dylan Edwards, it hurts, but at the same time, that this class is so fully loaded that it kind of takes away that sting a little bit. You never want to lose an athlete who can provide 4.3 speed, like Dylan Edwards can. But there's a lot still to be excited about in this recruiting class for Notre Dame.
Exactly. Best way to put it. There's a lot still in there. They've got a couple of running backs, whether it's Lamar or Love, and they've got obviously a lot with the wide receiver position as well. So hopefully that offsets it. Like you said, you never want to lose anybody, but between what they already have at running back, I know that they were talking about Edwards as a slot receiver and that kind of stuff, but there is other skill talent there. So hopefully that makes up for it, and they're able to keep those guys, because we have less than 2 weeks until signing day. All right, so again, we'll wrap it up. Hit the like button if you would before you leave tonight. We appreciate you as always. Subscribe, rate, and review. All the good stuff. Jesse, great contributions. We'll be back tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe we'll get more breaking news tomorrow. Jesse, Vince, and I with the special Friday 4:30 live rapid fire Friday afternoon. We've got that coming up heading into the weekend. So I will talk to you then, Jess.
Sounds good. I can't wait.
Me too. IB Nation Sports Talk. We'll talk to you later.